And thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us for Legacy Planning 101. So the presentation today is really focused on legacy planning for forestry professionals. My name is Kate Four, and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Woodlands. As most of you know, we are a statewide nonprofit organization that's really focused on caring for Vermont's forests by supporting the people who steward them. And today, that includes all of you, our forestry professionals. So today's webinar is actually part of our legacy planning series. We are really fortunate to have some funding from Vermont Housing Conservation Board to support a three-part series. And I'll share more at the end of the webinar today about the other webinars that are scheduled in the next month or two. But today's series is really part of our broader effort to support forest landowners in understanding their long-term options for their land. And as many of you know, our work at Vermont Woodlands Association, it includes both working with forestry professionals, but we're also offering Taking Stock, which is our online course for forest landowners who are interested in legacy planning. And so I just wanted to mention that on the outset here and just put a little plug in that, because that course is actually kicking off here on February 19th. We still have a few more spots open in that course. So if any of you guys know forest landowners who might be interested or you think might be a good fit, I'll put a link to that program in the chat and would love your help in getting the word out and connecting with landowners about that program as well. And so, again, that's really the focus of the conversation today. I think as forestry professionals, we all know you guys all play a really important role in helping landowners think about not only the short term, but also obviously the long-term opportunities and planning for their forests. Paul, I'm not going to steal any more of your thunder. I know that's what you're here to talk about today, and so I'll just leave it there. But again, really appreciate folks taking the time to join us today and being a part of this webinar. A few housekeeping things before we get started. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll actually share a link to the recorded webinar on our YouTube channel. So I'll send out an email after the webinar with a link to that. But if you are dying to see it and you want to catch it in the next day or two, it should be posted on the Vermont Woodlands Association YouTube channel hopefully by tomorrow morning. And so I also, just a quick reminder, I always love these presentations and the opportunity to do webinars. I think it's really important to give folks the opportunity to ask questions. So really encourage you to use the chat, as a place to pop a question while Paul is going through his presentation. And then at the end, Paul, I don't know how you feel about people unmuting themselves and asking questions live, but recognizing it is a small group today, I would encourage folks to be able, just to go ahead and unmute yourself, put your camera on if you're comfortable, and go ahead and just ask questions towards the end of the webinar. Last item is the webinar today is approved for one continuing education credit for Vermont foresters, Vermont licensed foresters. And so I would ask if folks could just go ahead and put your name and email address in the chat box. I'll follow up with you directly after today's presentation. Okay, with that, today's presenter is Paul Catanzaro. Most of us are really familiar with Paul's work, but by way of quick introduction, Paul is a professor of forest ecology and conservation at the University of Massachusetts. He serves as the state extension forester and is co-director of the Family Forest Research Center, which is a partnership between UMASS and USDA. Paul's done this work for over 25 years and has really, I think, here in the Northeast played a really important role in helping to not only study, but also support family forest owners in understanding and accomplishing their goals and doing good work on the ground in their forests. And so, again, I want to leave it there because I could go on for hours about all the work that Paul has done. As we know, he's supported a lot of publications, around different topics, obviously legacy planning, forest carbon, old growth, you name it. Paul has, I think, really been an instrumental part of forestry education and outreach here in the Northeast. And he's somebody who I think has spent a lot of time supporting landowners in particular in thinking about the future of their forests. So with that, Paul, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and talk to us today about supporting forest landowners in legacy planning. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kate. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy day on this beautiful winter day that we finally got here to have this conversation, learn a little bit more about conservation-based estate planning. The first thing I want to do is start with a disclaimer. And that disclaimer, as you could tell from Kate's introduction, is that I am not a lawyer. I actually went to forestry school and my graduate degree is in silviculture, and I really thought I was going to spend my entire career just in the intricacies of shelter woods and selection systems and irregular shelter woods and all kinds of things. And when I got out of when I got out of college and started working with landowners, I had this experience that the conversations they were having about implementing a group selection versus a shelter wood weren't as important as the conversations they were having in regard to what was going to happen to their land in terms of who was going to own it and how it was going to be used. And so, although it was never my intent, I started learning about conservation-based estate planning and started trying to figure out ways to help landowners keep their land forested and keep it producing the wonderful benefits that we all rely on. So over the last almost 15 years, thanks to funding from the Bureau of Forestry down here in Massachusetts, I've been developing programs and resources for landowners to help them make decisions about the future of their land and want to share some of those with you today. The presentation, I guess, is roughly divided into thirds. The first third is just sort of the justification of why it's so important that we as foresters get engaged with this topic. The middle third is really the guts or the nuts and bolts of conservation-based estate planning. As I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going into great depth, and I think that's an important point that I want to make today, is that you do not need to be an expert in the laws and the tax codes and things to have a significant impact in helping landowners. And then that back third of the presentation, I've reserved for some resources and just some ideas or some thoughts as to how you in your day-to-day routine as a consulting forester or working with private landowners can help influence these decisions. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So just a couple of background numbers. Just this isn't a Vermont-based issue by any stretch. Landowners across the country are at an average age of about 65 years old. In fact, you can do surveys of landowners in one county, one state, 5 states across the country. It remarkably comes in very consistently around 63, 65 years old. So we have old landowners. And I know I've been told when I do programs that we've always had old landowners, but the point is, and I'll show this in a second, we have a disproportionate amount of old landowners owning land at this point in time. So when we talk about the kids getting the land, which is why I show this picture, the kid isn't the woman in the middle. The kid is actually the 60-year-old on the right. So when we talk about landowners being on average 65 years old, of course, that means that many more are actually even older than that. Let's drill down into Vermont here based on the most recent National Woodland Owner Survey numbers. You can see that we have Vermont has a disproportionate amount of landowners in these older age classes. In fact, about 85% of landowners are 55 years and older. I just turned 55. I just got my AARP card. I'm feeling a little old. So that's 85% of landowners. That's 85% of acreage. I decided to run it based on acreage. So 85% of landowners, private landowners, are 55 and older, and more than half are actually 65 or older. So a lot of landowners in these age classes making decisions or not making decisions, as the case may be, about the future of their land. I pulled this from the Vermont Forest Action Plan, and again, this is not unusual across the country. I think one afternoon I took an hour or two and I looked at the forest action plans that all states have to develop. I looked across the 20-state Northeast area, and every forest action plan includes a bullet like this one in Vermont that for something about forest conversion, forest parcelation, intergenerational transfer, legacy, those issues are a top critical issue for states all across the country, including Vermont. We know from our research and from our experience that at times of ownership transition, the land is very vulnerable to conversion and parcelization. This is the time when land may be given to the next generation. Siblings are trying to quote unquote make things fair. Maybe the land gets sold and the money gets liquidated and divided evenly. Maybe land is parcelized and given in different ways to different landowners, or excuse me, to different siblings. So we know that at this time of transition, people are looking around, families are looking around. What are we going to do? What's going to happen to the land? How do we each meet our needs, both our personal needs as well as our financial needs, with this asset? And this is why, with so many landowners, disproportionately in these older age classes, this becomes a real concern. This was a graph I think Ali Kasiba did for the forest carbon inventory up there in Vermont. Again, just showing forest loss through those years that are represented there. So forest is being lost, decisions are being made, and forest is being lost on the net. And there's a lot at stake. And we talk about, I'm involved in a lot of conversations, as I'm sure you are, about the value of forest for climate change mitigation, or the value of forest for wood products and local economies, or the value of forest for biodiversity crisis, fill in the blank, for recreation, for public health, for, all of those benefits go away when forests go away. And so I often feel as though we miss the first step of the conversation when we jump into conversations about, okay, so what's the best way to secure carbon and keep it in the long term? The best way is to make sure we have forests, that forests are forests and they maintain themselves as forests for all of those public benefits that that sustain us. It takes having forests, and that means addressing these issues, these landowner decisions about what's going to happen to their land in the future. The longer I've been doing this, the more I've realized that last slide about all the wonderful myriad benefits that are provided by forest is really in some ways sort of the cold and slimy slide. It's the nuts and bolts. It's the hard facts. It's why many of us got into forestry. But the longer I do this, the more I realize that there's a warmer and fuzzier side to this, which is that families are struggling with what to do with their land. And it can be a huge help in terms of the family's well-being, in terms of the family's relationships, to have this kind of help to sustain their family through these transitions in a way that meets everyone's needs, hopefully. So there's a human side to it. I developed this slide because I get tired of going to forestry meetings and not hearing this talked about more. As I said, this is not why I went to forestry school. This is not why I got into our profession. But the more I'm in it, the more I recognize that just square one is stabilizing this forest base. And in Vermont, it looked like from Ali's graph, you are in fact losing forests. In Massachusetts and in southern New England, you can imagine that that's happening in a more visible, in a more rapid rate.
I'm okay for now.
In fact, in some ways, we are the ghost of forestry future. Now is the time to react. Now is the time to help stabilize that. And in terms of a critical issue in forestry, and I know we're dealing with invasive plants, we're dealing with invasive insects, we're dealing with climate change, we're dealing with lots of things, but all of those, the essence of that is keeping forests as forests. You play a critical role. We all do as foresters. And I'm sort of break down by bullet why you play such a critical role. You are a trusted resource. When we did a survey of forest landowners in New York, Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts a few years ago, and we ask them about where they look for information about the future of their land, more than a third of respondents said that they are plan on contacting their local forester. You are a trusted source for not only this decision, but obviously decisions about the stewardship of their land. And so oftentimes those two things go together. How they treat their land is tied up with this conversation or this decision about what will happen to it in the future. You have a unique position. You have intimate knowledge of the land and its resources, in its frontage, in the amount of wetlands, if there are endangered species, what the timber value is worth, what the access is, what those options are. You have an intimate knowledge of that. You may also, depending on how long you've worked with the family or in what ways you've worked with the landowners, you may know the family dynamic. You may know the children. You may know that one child is really interested in the land, one child isn't. So you have that intimate knowledge of the land and oftentimes the family. It's not uncommon for you to have obviously a business relationship. If you're a consulting forester, you're being paid by the family. That's a business relationship, and it's obviously very common that as a part of that relationship, you may have helped them sell timber worth thousands of dollars. You may have helped them implement some sort of practices, either for wildlife, maybe invasive plant management. So you've dealt with them on that level, not only personally, but also sort of in that business relationship. And you are talking to landowners when they're making decisions about their land. And we know from research that for the most part, on most days, landowners are not thinking about necessarily what to do with their land. They're thinking about their jobs and their kids and their vacations and life. Life is busy. It's only periodically really that most landowners are thinking about their land and are in a position to make decisions about it, whether it be its stewardship or its estate planning. And you happen to be there when those triggers happen. You happen to be there when someone knocks on the door and offers them money for their timber, or you happen to be there when their management plan is up for renewal, or whatever the issue is, or that EAB shows up in their woodlot. You're there for those decisions while they're thinking about their land. It puts you in a really unique position. And I'm just taking a guess here. You can correct me, but my sense is that most consulting foresters are in terms of their client base have 20, 30, 40,000 acres worth of clients. So in terms of somebody in a really strategic position, you're an excellent audience. So you have the ability to really make profound impacts on this issue. As I mentioned to you in my introduction, this was not what I planned on doing as a part of my career. And the more I reflect on it, the more I realize that's just what a career is. That if you're operating in 2026 with the education you got in 1995, you're probably not doing something right. That as our careers move forward, there are shifts in terms of critical issues, economies, ecologies, knowledge, science, in terms of your practice, your experience. All of those things change through time, and we need to keep up with those. And here are just a couple of things that I just brainstormed that at least wasn't going on when I was in forestry school. I mean, we weren't talking about invasive plants. GIS was just sort of starting. Drones, no one even imagined that was something out of the Jetsons. And AI is even starting to creep into forestry. So, my point being, I would suggest to you that the critical nature of this issue is such that I would highly encourage you to gain knowledge and comfort and experience with it, so that you can fold it into a part of your day-to-day routine. Every consulting forester is a little bit different. Some really love wildlife. My experience is some like the recreation end. Some are really do a lot of timber sales. Everybody has their own interests and experience and sort of take on it. But I would hope, or I would encourage you to consider weaving this thread in some way into your day-to-day routine. and I will show a number of slides, at least just some thoughts at the end of the presentation on ways in which you might be able to do that. Um, as I said to you at the beginning of this, you don't need to be an expert. I sense that when I've talked to foresters about this, they're hesitant because I think, our comfort level is if we're going to go out and have a conversation about something, of course we want to know our stuff and we don't want to be embarrassed by it or we don't want to give bad information. You play a really unique role, as I just described. You don't need to be the expert in tax codes. They have those. You don't need to be the experts in wills and trusts. There are lawyers that do that. There are professionals. You don't need to take that on. What you have a unique role is you're in contact with landowners at the time they're making decisions. They already trust you. You know the land, all of those things I just talked about. So please don't let the idea that you've got to, now go back to law school or brush up on the tax code. I mean, God bless you if you want to, but that's not the role that you need to play. And please don't let that stop you from doing good things, both ecologically as well as socially in terms of the family. Here we go. Um, I do hear once in a while people talking about keeping forests as forests. As I said, they're oftentimes in all of these state action plans. But then when I take that a step further and I'll say, okay, well that's good. They've got that listed in the state action plan. What are they doing about it, or what's the recommendation? I will say I too often am disappointed that they'll say, "Oh, we need more money for cost share. We need more people engaged with forest stewardship or things." And there's nothing wrong with those things. Those are fantastic tools for helping landowners steward their land. And yes, there's a connection between one and the other, but you wouldn't seek to regenerate shade intolerant species with a single tree selection. So we need the right tool for the right job. And so what I would suggest to you is that we need to expand those tools that we in forestry consider within our domain to include conservation-based estate planning. And so if the fire drill is what's happening in terms of landowner decisions, I would suggest that this is one of the solutions. So let's talk a little bit about that. So start very basic. An estate plan for us in forestry, oftentimes we hear the word plan, we think of like a management plan, a use value plan, a stewardship plan. But an estate plan is really a combination of documents and tools. It's as much a process as it is a thing. Some documents, as we'll talk about, help with one set of goals, and other documents and tools help with other sets of goals. And so it's the combination of the documents and tools that are developed that help the landowner achieve their personal and financial goals. Conservation-based estate planning, and of course, estate planning is a much broader topic that includes things like healthcare proxies and lots of other things that we won't touch. But there are parts of estate planning that do overlap directly with deciding the future of one's land. And so I called that conservation-based estate planning. So there are those elements, those tools, those documents, legal documents that can help in terms of land. And my experience is that many landowners know that they have the option to subdivide and develop their land, but not many know their options to keep some or all of their land undeveloped, and sort of how to do that in a formal legal way. And so that's conservation-based estate planning. It is meant to meet people's personal and financial goals. And when you look at the National Woodland Owner Survey, or you look at many other surveys, there's a very striking pattern that landowners tell us they would like to see their land stay forested, and they would like to see their land stay in one piece and not be split up. In fact, the numbers are overwhelming. Now, intention doesn't equal action, right? So there are a number of reasons why that may not translate from intention to actually on the ground applied things to make sure the land stays in whole. and in forest. And some of those things are time and knowledge and those sorts of things. And there's some things you can't work on or help with, but there are some things that you can, and that's what we'll talk about. The goal, I would suggest, is to pass on as much land as possible with as much forest in as big of a parcel as possible to help maintain and sustain all of those benefits that forests provide that I showed on the slide that you're intimately familiar with. The bigger the parcel, the better. When we get down to smaller parcels, it obviously complicates the landscape, more decision makers, and there are clear patterns of parcelized landscapes leads to less timber harvesting, less active management, both in terms of the operational constraints, but also in terms of the social piece that goes with that and the shift in value. So keep the plate spinning, keep as much land and forest and as big of a parcel as possible. That's the goal. That's the bottom line goal of conservation-based estate planning. And you know that land is an asset that is likely, in terms of a landowner's portfolio, their most valuable asset. But it has this unique characteristic. It's not like a stock or a bond. It has personal value. It has both this financial value and oftentimes the most financially valuable, but it also has that personal value. Either the land got passed down from grandparents or parents, or it's where you raise your family, or landowners feel very connected to the wildlife or the silviculture investments they've made in there, whatever it might be. It's a unique kind of asset. And the challenge, of course, is helping landowners meet their financial needs, because there is nothing wrong with meeting your financial needs. We're all, I hope, going to grow old and retire. We want to make sure we're financially secure. We want to make sure our partner, our wife, our husband, our kids are financially secure. A lot of parents report that they want to give money, be able to leave their kids some money or some finances. I know I do. So that's really important. Life's messy. It's a very important part of it. But there are also these very personal oftentimes needs that landowners want to see. At least they report to us, and we often hear them say they want to see their land stay undeveloped. So that's the challenge. And I would suggest that for a forester, that's a conversation you've had, especially regarding timber harvesting. Like what side of the spectrum do you fall on? Is this timber harvest meant to liquidate all value, or are we sustaining this, for another couple of entries, and we're going to grow it out and really increase the veneer, or whatever it might be, or is it somewhere in the middle? You need a furnace now, but you don't want to liquidate the value. Similarly, this is a scale that some colleagues put together at Oregon State just to help landowners, get this sense of, are you on this side of the trajectory or the spectrum, or are you on that side, and to start family conversations about what their personal and financial needs might be in terms of making some of these decisions. And again, and you know this better than anybody, because you sit at kitchen tables and you walk woodlots with landowners, and they've got very real needs, right? It's not always black and white. Life is messy. It's oftentimes somewhere in the gray. And the good news is that land is a flexible asset that lends itself to creative solutions, both that financial piece as well as the personal values. It would be much easier if in some ways, if it was cookie cutter, because that way I could email each of you a PDF that says these are the 5 things that all landowners should do, and they'll meet all their needs. But everybody's different. Everybody has different financial needs, different families. Some have kids, some don't have kids, some have stepkids, different goals, different characteristics to the forest. The landscape in which the forest is embedded is different. So everybody's a little bit different. There's no one right solution. It's really a matter of finding the combination of tools and documents that will meet the landowner's needs. And I've put this photo from the Riley family case study we'll talk about in a minute, just to show a story in which those tools were put together to meet their needs. So let's dive into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts. So a deed is something I'm sure you're very familiar with. You're doing boundary lines, or you're doing your current use plan, at least in Massachusetts. You got to put deed numbers and things on there. So I'm sure you've read lots of these, I'm sure. This happens to be my deed for my property. recognize that the deed, in the absence of everything else, serves as a mini estate plan. That the ownership in which this deed is listed is the way in which the land will transfer. In this particular case, my wife and I own the land together. So should I pass away, because of the joint ownership, it would automatically go to my wife. So in the absence of any other formal documentation, it serves as that mini estate plan. Importantly, and this is where I don't want to get over the tips of my skis here. I know at least in Massachusetts, the deed overrides the will. Okay, so that this is one way to start a conversation with the landowner. Just, do you know what the ownership of your land is, and do you know what the implications are? I'm sure this is a site very familiar to you if you've been out looking for deeds. I'm going to show you a resource from Vermont that you can access these, but I put together two tables. One is an ownership table of direct ownership, meaning the land is owned directly by an individual or actual people. Sometimes it's owned by multiple people, sometimes it's owned by one or two, but the features column shows how that land will be passed on. And the other table shows just a couple of examples of indirect ownerships. And this is another path that landowners can take, which is an entity is actually created, a legal entity like a trust or a limited liability company. That's a legal entity that's created that is actually the owner of the assets that are put under that. And land can be one of those assets. So one of the ways to start with a landowner is, I hope, a way you're very familiar with, which is looking at the deed and just informing them of how that land will be passed on. They may be very happy with that. That might be the exact way they want to be passed on, but it may not be. And so in terms of determining the future ownership, that's a way to start a conversation. That's just one tool. Ownership is just one tool in this range of conservation-based estate planning opportunities. And over the last 15 years, I've tried to think very broadly about this because landowners are very different and everybody has a different set of goals and circumstances, different trust levels in terms of who they want to work with or what they want to put into writing and formalize it, or maybe it's a funding issue in terms of hiring professionals to help them develop these documents and things. So I've tried to think very broadly about this. And so I'm going to start at the top of the list with something that has worked for some families, in some cases for generations. And that is making sure the kids that are going to get the land, and the kids don't always get the land, of course, but making sure the next owner knows what the wishes are for the land. That is an informal approach. There's nothing that bounds the land, the kids to implementing the parents' wishes when they're gone. There's nothing. So it's not formal, and it can be changed. However, some landowners are comfortable with that. And if the only thing a landowner is willing to do is at least communicate to their heirs what their hopes are, you take it. It is what it is. And hopefully it does help guide the children's decisions. Now, formalizing it would be better. And that way the landowner has some sense of that their wishes are going to be carried through. Current use programs are one way that we'll talk about in another slide or two. Current use programs should be considered as a part of that package of documents and tools that can help people maintain their land in forest use, and in fact help with the overhead costs, the operating costs, the property taxes on it to make it affordable. Wishes can be used, put into a will or a trust. Wishes primarily for who gets the land next. I'll cover that in a minute. Not wishes in terms of how the land is used. That's not what they're built for. You can change the ownership type. You can change it with indirect, or you can change from direct to indirect. So there are opportunities there. Of course, there is a conservation easement that can be donated or sold, or the land itself can be donated or sold. So this is not meant to be a ladder of, you're a good landowner if you do this, you're a good landowner if you increase it. It's meant to be a la carte. It's meant to take, one tool because you need this and one document because you need that, and put it together to meet your personal and financial goals. So let's break that down even further. And we're good New Englanders and we love our maple syrup. And so let's compare it to boiling down some sap. All right. These these conversations can be overwhelming for people. And so over the last 15 years, I've sort of gotten to the point where I'm just boiling it down. Two questions to consider when you're talking to a landowner, just to help them break it down into bite-sized pieces. Do you want to determine who will own the land next? And do you want to determine how it will be used? If they do want to determine who will own the land next, and most, at least from our survey work, vast majority do want to determine that, then there are tools to help them with that. They can develop a will, they can develop a trust, and there's a number of different kinds of trusts that, frankly, I don't know the nuances of, and that's what estate planning attorneys are for. And they can change the ownership type to make sure the land is passed on the way they want. So within these questions, you can sort of break down or package these tools. The other major question is, do you want to determine how the land can be used? And we've asked this of landowners on our surveys in the Northeast, and more than half the landowners tell us they want to determine it. And we even asked on one survey if they want to do it temporarily or permanently. And surprisingly, more landowners told us they wanted to do it permanently than temporarily. But that's a decision point. So do you want to determine how the land will be used? If the landowner says yes, then that's the question. Do you want to do so temporarily or permanently? If they want to do it temporarily, the use value appraisal program is an interesting way to do that. And you can also build into the trust and LLC some amount of wishes in terms of how the land is treated. It's not as complete or as strong, obviously, as a conservation easement, but it can be used to help with that. You can also, if the landowner does want to do so permanently, make some decisions about the land. They can, of course, develop a conservation easement with a conservation organization, be it a state agency, federal agency, land trust, NGO, those sorts of things. And I find not many landowners are necessarily, at least report being interested in this, but of course, donating or selling the land to a conservation organization is another option. So I find it's helpful for landowners to just like boil it down. Who do I want to give it to? And let's develop a will, a trust, or an ownership to do that. And do I want to determine how that land will be used and whether it's permanent or temporary? I find that those are really good sort of decision trees that can be helpful. So let me just tell you a couple real stories. They're Massachusetts, but they're relatable. The first family are the Thompsons. They owned about 50 acres in central Massachusetts. It was 3 kids that owned it together, and it was going to their kids. So it was going from 3 to 12. So they decided to set up a family trust, and that each branch, so to speak, of the family would have a vote, or they would have, be 1/3. Each branch was named as a representative. I'm sorry. So that's how they set up the ownership and the decision-making structure. And then as they were doing that, we had an ice storm in Massachusetts. They hired a consulting forester who enrolled them in our current use program. So that now they had the ownership taken care of. They had the decision structure within the trust taken care of. They had this current use program to help with the overhead costs. They had implemented a timber harvest to help with some of the maintenance that they were running into, like maintaining the road, putting a gate up, replacing culverts, the deal. And that combination worked for the Thompson family. When I talked to the Thompsons about what their goals were, it was very interesting. They said they wanted to be able to hold on to the land and be able to all sit at a table together on 4th of July, which was their annual tradition, to break bread together, to have a meal together, to have a celebration together. Those were their goals. And in order to, and the solution for them to do that was building this trust, deciding how the decision framework was going to be, reducing the overhead costs, incorporating active forest management to help with some of the costs. That combination of tools and documents gave them the opportunity to sit around and have hot dogs together on 4th of July. One more story. So the Rileys, Mrs. Riley was a hoot. She had about 300 acres, and she was just one of those characters that just loved the land. She had blueberry fields and birds and forest management and the whole 9 yards. She helped raise her grandkids on the property. She had an old World War II Willys Jeep, and the grandkids tell stories about learning how to drive on Graham's dirt roads on the property in this Willys Jeep. She sounds like she was a real character. She did not do any formal planning, but she did raise those three grandkids and was very clear with them about her love of the land and what she wanted done with it. And so fortunately, the three grandkids actually worked together, though there was no formal or legal reason they needed to honor her wishes after she died. So this is what they did. Her land happened to back up to the Quabbin watershed, so state land. So they sold 80 acres of their land to the Quabbin because that was in the watershed, and so they sold that to the Quabbin to the state, and then they donated a conservation easement on the 188 acres, that brown area polygon. Interestingly, the proceeds that they made from the sale and were offset in terms of the taxes by the donation they made for the CR. So again, these tools working together. You also see those three smaller polygons. Each kid, each grandchild took a building lot. So life is messy. We want our personal and financial goals met. Sometimes that's conserving all of it. Oftentimes that's some combination of some limited develop or the grandkids get a house lot and some donation and things. So the combination of tools working together to meet their needs. So in the last couple minutes, I just want to show you some resources that might be helpful for you and some slides of just ways in which I think it's possible to weave some of this into your day-to-day. So there is a website, ourvermontwoods.org/legacy, that was created through a grant that several of us had gotten across the Northeast. I don't know how active it is now, but it's still there, and there are these resources. So there was a publication called It's Your Legacy that is adapted from a Massachusetts publication that I did, and so I adapted that to Vermont. So there are Vermont logos on there, Vermont resources, and so you can hand it to a landowner and it has that Vermont feel. A will is still a will, whether you're in Vermont or, so a lot of the information is the same, but it has that Vermont packaging and resources. I also did a publication called Using a Will to Pass on Your Land. I did not adapt that specifically, so you'll have to bear with the fact that it's a flatlander state. But there's still good information relevant to landowners. So there's information on this page and hard copies, I'm sure, somewhere, or at least PDFs. Oh, those are the links. Sorry. I hope all of you are connected with your local land trust. If you're not, this is a tool that's actually you can find on that site as well, that you can connect with your local land trust. That integration of forestry and land protection to me is critical in the Northeast. I would highly encourage you to introduce yourself if you don't already know your local land trust. Get to know the land protection specialist. Get to know what kinds of properties, where their priority areas are, in ways you can collaborate. You're a huge resource to them, and they can be a huge resource to you. So here are just a couple ways I think that maybe you can help weave some of these in. Perhaps the best way to do it is just to connect landowners to people that can help them. When we ask people their challenges to get from intention to action, like actually keeping their land undeveloped and in one piece, one of the top reasons they always give us is they don't know who to go to, or they don't have a name. If you were doing a timber harvest, you wouldn't let the landowner find their own timber harvester. If you were, treating invasive plants, you would likely help them find someone that is licensed that can do this. We help landowners in all other aspects of their land stewardship. I would encourage you to even get a list of a couple estate planning attorneys, your local land trust, people that you can whip it out and say, you know what, call Julie. She's a great estate planning attorney. I would encourage you, of course, there are lots of estate planning attorneys. Not all of them have experience with land and land conservation. So having a couple of great attorneys that work with landowners that know this stuff is huge. Your local land trust. I would also encourage you, if everyone's comfortable, to connect clients, to connect landowners. There is no substitute for one landowner telling the other landowner what they did, what went well, what didn't, why they did it. It's a very powerful tool. So if you have some clients that have done some estate planning that are willing to share that, that's very powerful. Forest Stewardship Program, the actual national standards and guidelines in terms of the plan elements call for conservation-based estate planning within the stewardship plan. So that's an opportunity when you're talking about what the resources they have, they're in planning mode, they're thinking about the future of their land, to have that conversation, to let them know what their ownership is, or ask them if they've thought about it, ask them if they need a resource. There's no question that pairing silviculture with estate planning is a winning combination. It takes decades for us oftentimes to get to our desired future condition, or to put those extra 3 inches of diameter growth on before you're ready to have a regeneration harvest. Whatever it might be, it's decades. If the average age of a landowner is 65 and many are older, that may not even be to the next entry. So pairing silviculture at a time, again, they're thinking about the land, having that conversation of, hey, we're creating a desired future condition, or we're leaving this amount of acceptable growing stock with the hope that it'll be harvested in the future. How about some estate planning to make sure that your heirs can benefit from that? Another opportunity. As I talked about, checking the deed, determining ownership, I've already covered that. You're already oftentimes pulling the deed, looking at that. I have had foresters, and I've actually paid for this, not that it's a huge expense, for foresters to write a cover letter and send a resource to one of their clients, or some of their clients, or all of their clients. My experience is the consulting foresters sort of have a sense that these 6 or 8 or these 10 or 15 landowners are sick, or they're thinking about it, or they're ready to move, or they're trying to figure out what to do. Sending them a letter, personalized letter, sign it, stick in it's your legacy, offer to meet. It's a great way to get a conversation started. I will tell you, in some of our research, women play, I would suggest, a disproportionate role oftentimes in decisions about the future of their land. Women tend to be, just in the literature, women tend to be, first of all, more generous, and second of all, tend to be more engaged in communication. And so women often, while oftentimes men may play a stronger role sometimes with things like timber harvests, women, I think, play a disproportionate role in these decisions. Women oftentimes live longer than men, so that's another dynamic. We also know that women rate themselves to be less confident to make decisions. This is women that rate themselves as being less confident. But we also know that women that rate themselves confident are significantly more likely to pursue some sort of conservation option. So women, moving that needle on women's confidence matters in terms of what happens to that land in the future. I don't know where the women in our woods in Vermont is, and I know sometimes networks sort of fluctuate in terms of activity, but there is a WOW Vermont. There's the website. We have Women on the Land in Massachusetts that we introduced this conservation-based estate planning, as well as land management and wildlife and things. Getting involved in that, supporting women, having those conversations can be another great way for you to interact. I did want to say I'm doing a landowner webinar right now. We're about halfway through, but I had a conversation with a colleague at TNC and another colleague at the American Forest Foundation, and they're interested in developing a Northeast webinar series for landowners probably in September or October of this year. So I will certainly put that out through the networks. If you have clients that you think would be interested in that, please pass on the word. Even just great way to start a conversation. Couple just quick words of advice and I'll wrap up here. Be patient. I sometimes run into people, foresters, land trust folks, open space committee members, well-intentioned. That's an important piece of land. It should be protected, or I want to help the family. Sometimes families aren't ready and decisions are infrequent. They're not always thinking about, it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to think about. It's a complex topic, even though we can boil it down into 2 questions oftentimes. I would suggest to be patient, recognize the opportunities, plant a seed, fertilize it. You know how to grow better than anybody. But just recognize that it's a complicated situation, but you stand in a good position to help them. And I want to leave you with this. So we did some evaluation a couple of years ago on our outreach work and found that 70% of people surveyed that attended our course or, our programs or received our literature reported that they made progress in developing a conservation-based estate planning. And the folks at Oregon and New York that are doing this ties to the land program did a similar evaluation, and they found 71. They beat me by 1. I don't know if there's a margin of error there or something, but my point being, this is an issue we can influence. We can take away some obstacles like not knowing who to call or not knowing what the options are. You don't have to be the expert. We can impact this. So these decisions are shaping our landscape, and these are hard changes. Once forests go away, and become house lots or whatever, it's harder. It's not impossible, but it's harder to sort of aggregate those parcels back and long time periods to grow those forests back. This is, even though we're struggling with invasive plants and insects and things, I would suggest this is our biggest driver of permanent change. You play a critical role. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to be you. You just have to be the trusted forester that gives good advice, that knows some local resources, that is willing to have a conversation, that's there when they're making those decisions. Find a way to bring it up and support their efforts. So with that, I would be really interested if you do try things or that's how I learn. So please share what you learn, what works for you. That's my email address. If it's helpful, I'm happy to talk. And I've got resources on UMASS Woods as well. So with that, I will stop my share, and hopefully there's a minute or 2 for questions if people have any.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. And so, yeah, encourage folks, if you have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And I actually took over the screen share here because I was hoping to just kind of walk through a few kind of follow-up resources. And Paul, I really appreciate those resources that you mentioned. Just a few quick updates. Our Vermont Woods is actually going away, unfortunately. That was a grant-funded project, and unfortunately, there just hasn't really been an organization that has stepped up to take it on. And so I will put in the chat box, Vermont Woodlands Association, we do have a very similar resource on our website. So if you go to vermontwoodlands.org and go to our Explore by Topic, we have a whole, I actually mirrored it basically after our Vermont Woods. And so there's a whole section on legacy planning with resources that many of the resources, Paul, that you mentioned, as well as some Vermont-based resources. So as folks are thinking about questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I did want to just highlight a couple of Vermont-based resources. And one is this new Vermont-based workbook. And this is actually, Paul, very much built on all of your work as well as work from around the country. We had the opportunity to work with Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and Vermont Coverts to put together this workbook that really provides step-by-step strategies for landowners as well as a whole host of different information. I think actually some of your charts are even in here, Paul, talking about sort of, deciding about different tools and pros and cons of different structures of ownership. There's also a whole variety of worksheets that landowners can actually go through. So this resource is available, and I would encourage folks, I'm happy, like the It's Your Land, Your Legacy offer that Paul made. We have stacks of these workbooks at our office at Vermont Woodlands Association. So if you have clients who you would like to to receive a copy of this book or this workbook, please feel free to be in touch. I'm happy to mail those out and make those available for you guys, for you folks to share with clients. Again, it's a new Vermont-based resource. We're really excited, and we're really looking for help to get it out there. I wanted to just follow up with a couple of more Vermont-based resources. I mentioned in the beginning, Taking Stock. That is our online course, again, very much modeled after Ties to the Land. It's really intended to help landowners kind of go through the process of understanding their options, and then making sort of we call it an action plan. So helping them think about next steps and identify ways for them to move forward. That course is actually 5 webinars, so similar to today's webinar. There's an introductory webinar. There's a night where we call it Lawyer Night. We actually bring in a state-based planner, or excuse me, state-based attorney, and have landowners, give them the opportunity to ask questions. And then we also have a night on communication. And then we also we have a night where we bring in all of our conservation partners. So Vermont Land Trust, River Conservancy, other folks who support landowners in making decisions around conservation easements and opportunities to conserve land, come and share and sort of pitch their different programs and landowners have the opportunity to ask questions. We also, at Vermont Woodlands Association, we're still offering one-on-one consultation with landowners. We're entering into a new partnership with Eliza Walker with the Environmental Mediation Center. And so we're able to support landowners who want maybe 1 or 2 meetings with an estate-based, we're calling her an estate-based planning coach. And so the idea is that this is an opportunity for landowners who are interested in learning more, not really sure where to get started. We have funding to help bring them together with Eliza for 1 or 2 meetings to help them think about their options and develop a plan to get started. And then I just wanted to kind of throw in a pitch. I know Kathy Beeland is here on the webinar today, but the Vermont Tree Farm Program is also one of our core programs at Vermont Woodlands Association. And while it's not necessarily the same as UVA or a conservation easement, we have found over the years that a lot of families enroll their land in the Tree Farm Program as a way really to establish a legacy of good stewardship. And so I just wanted to throw a quick plug in for that program. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of circle back. So as I mentioned on the onset, today's webinar is a part of a webinar series. So today was really intended to kind of kick off the conversation and sort of bring you some higher level overview information around legacy planning. We will be joined in March by Liza Walker, who I mentioned earlier, with Environmental Mediation Center. And she's going to be talking to us sort of about navigating conversations. We're going to get more into communication and some of the tools that she has found to be helpful over the years to help you and your clients in terms of conversations, both as a professional to a landowner, but also conversations within families, because as Paul mentioned, this is messy, right? And so having some tools and some resources to help you as you're asking these questions and sharing this information with landowners, I think could be valuable, or hopefully will be valuable, and also helping landowners feel more comfortable in having these conversations within their families. And then finally, the last webinar is on legacy planning tools. We'll have Peter Van Loon with the Vermont Land Trust, who's going to give us a whole detailed sort of deep dive, I'm calling it, into easements. And then we're still in the process of scheduling because we're still waiting to nail down our estate planning attorney, but we'll also have an attorney join us for that webinar. And that webinar will be in April. So with that was just the Vermont-based resources that I wanted to share. Again, thank you everybody for being here today, for being a part of this webinar. I see that there's a few questions in the chat. As I'm reading that off, I'm going to go ahead and I put in a link to our website, to our legacy planning topic page on our website, which has a lot of these resources. And so, Paul, there is a question from Greg, and please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourselves and put your camera on if you want to ask a question live. But Greg asks about donating easements is there a tax advantage for landowners who are still working? Do all land trusts accept easements and landowners that have donated money in addition to offset future monitoring costs or stewardship costs? Can you speak a little bit to that, Paul?
Yeah, Peter obviously is the expert in terms of previewing, I don't know, webinar 5 or whatever it is, or advertising it. So Peter will get more into depth. But yes, land trusts accept conservation easements is a matter of course. The question is the piece of land a good fit with that organization and its mission? When a land trust takes on a piece of land, it's taking on a commitment in perpetuity to steward it, to monitor it, and so forth. So you have to make sure, and every organization, just like all of us, have limited time, energy, and resources. So land trusts need to be particular about what responsibilities they take on. So yes, in general, land trusts do take easements. Whether they would take that specific one would have to be a conversation with that land trust to see if it's a good fit for everybody. In terms of the money, in addition to the offset future monitoring costs, it's possible. My experience is that different land trusts work that in different ways. But more land trusts are requesting a donation that goes into an endowment that helps pay for the monitoring. When a landowner, asks a land trust to make sure this never gets developed, or, whatever the easement language is, they're taking on that responsibility, and that means they need to hire somebody that go out there every year and so forth. So typically, yes, but every land trust is a little bit different. I would ask them the specifics of that. And if that was the thing holding the whole project up, I would talk to the land trust about that too.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. And Greg, hopefully that answers your question. And please do chime in or stay tuned for our webinar in April, because I think we'll be able to dive a lot deeper into that and explore those different options as well. So with that, if folks have, again, please feel free to unmute yourself and jump on and ask questions live. Paul and I are happy to stick around for a few minutes. But I just want to thank Paul so much for taking the time to join us. I mean, as I was thinking about this series, I couldn't think of a better person who's really well positioned to kind of kick this conversation off and share, I think, really what I see as the opportunity here, right? Which is exactly what Paul was talking about in terms of, the opportunity for you as professionals engaging with landowners to plant those seeds, to talk about kind of to ask questions and talk to them about the importance of legacy planning. Please consider Vermont Woodland Association as, a partner in this work. And, we're here to support you. So in addition to chiming into the rest of the webinar series, if you have needs or have questions, please, I might not always have the answers, but please feel free to reach out, because we want to be a resource for you guys in helping to support your clients and your landowners in thinking about this issue. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you so much, Paul, for giving us this great overview and inspiration, really, in terms of thinking about our roles as forestry professionals in this work. I see a lot of hands clapping out there, Paul, and I know I really appreciate the opportunity to hear about the work that you've been doing here in the Northeast. And your work extends way beyond Massachusetts, so for that we are thankful. And you're not a flatlander to me, Paul. So
thanks, Kate. That's probably the best.
Appreciate all your help.
That's the best compliment I've gotten in a long time. So thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for this opportunity. I appreciate it. I hope everyone has a great day.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul. Look forward to more in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And please, I forgot to mention, if you are looking for credits and you haven't put a note in the chat, please go ahead and do that before you sign off. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and enjoy stay warm out there, I guess. Enjoy the cold snap, or stay warm, however you enjoy the woods.
Thanks, Kate.